The light finds Izabel Goulart at 5:47 a.m., right where it always does. On the mat, mid-plank, mid-prayer. Her breath is metronomic, her body a cathedral of muscle and devotion. Paris is still sleeping, but Izabel has never trusted sleep. The girl who was once mocked for standing too tall now holds herself perfectly still, defying gravity and memory alike. The world calls it obsession. She calls it faith. But rewind to 2023, when the internet exploded with a headline that seemed to shake the very foundation of her carefully constructed image. Izabel Goulart's obsessive workout routine sparks debate on body standards. Critics flooded comment sections, wellness influencers penned think pieces, and suddenly the woman who had spent 2 decades perfecting her craft was being accused of promoting unhealthy obsession. 2 hours a day, 6 days a week. Is this discipline or disorder? They asked. Hashtags trended, debates raged. Debates. The controversy wasn't just about exercise. It was about control, about perfection, about the impossible standards women in the public eye are expected to maintain while simultaneously being criticized for the methods they use to maintain them. Diet blogs dissected her meals. Fitness experts analyzed her form. Psychologists who had never met her diagnosed her from afar. The digital mob had found its target, and they were relentless. What made the backlash particularly cutting was its source. These weren't men criticizing her, though plenty of them joined in, but other women, self-proclaimed body positivity advocates who saw Izabel's dedication as a personal affront to their own struggles with fitness and self-image. "She's making the rest of us feel inadequate," one viral tweet read, as if Izabel's morning plank routine was somehow an attack on strangers she'd never met. And in the center of it all stood Izabel, unflinching, unapologetic, her response as precise as her training regimen. Self-discipline isn't obsession, it's self-respect. The controversy exposed a deeper divide in modern culture, between those who saw her dedication as inspirational and those who viewed it as dangerous. Was Izabel Goulart a role model for empowerment or a cautionary tale about the pressures of beauty standards? Was her relentless pursuit of physical excellence a testament to strength or a symptom of an industry that demands perfection at any cost? The questions multiplied, but Izabel's answer remained singular, unwavering, carved from the same granite that built her career. She wasn't chasing youth. She was chasing endurance, and to understand why she refuses to slow down, why she treats every workout like a prayer and every runway like a battlefield, we must travel back to where it all began, to a small city in São Paulo where a girl who was too tall to fit in learned that standing out wasn't a curse, it was a calling. It was a São Carlos, São Paulo, Brazil. October 23rd, 1984. Maria Izabel Goulart. Dourado was born into a world where survival required more than beauty. It required grit. The fourth of 6 children in a working-class Catholic family, Izabel grew up in a house where resources were scarce and resilience was currency. Her father worked multiple jobs. Her mother stretched every reel until it screamed. There were no modeling agencies in their neighborhood, no fashion magazines on their coffee table, no indication that this skinny, disproportionately tall girl would one day become one of Brazil's most recognized exports. But even in childhood, Izabel possessed something that couldn't be taught or bought, an almost supernatural discipline. While her siblings played, she organized. While others complained, she adapted. She woke early to help her mother, stayed late to finish homework, and moved through the world with a purposefulness that seemed borrowed from someone much older. School, however, was a battlefield. By age 12, Izabel had shot up to 5'9", towering over her classmates like a sapling in a field of grass. Her limbs were long and ungainly, her body all angles and bones. The other children were merciless. Giraffe, they called her. Stick insect. Freak. They mocked her in hallways, excluded her from games, made her feel like her body was a mistake that needed correcting. Most children would have shrunk from such cruelty, would have hunched their shoulders and tried to disappear. But something defiant was being forged in Izabel during those years, something that would later become her superpower. Years later, she would say, "They called me a giraffe. I learned to stand tall anyway." Every insult was a seed. She watered them with sweat. Her mother noticed the bullying but had no platitudes to offer, only pragmatism. "God doesn't make mistakes, Izabel. If he made you tall, he had a reason." It was a simple statement, but it planted a seed, the idea that her difference wasn't a flaw to be fixed but a feature to be leveraged. The transformation came on an ordinary Saturday afternoon in 1998. 14-year-old Izabel was at a supermarket in Sao Paulo with her mother when a woman approached them. She was a talent scout for a modeling agency, and she saw in Izabel what Izabel couldn't yet see in herself, not just height but presence, not just beauty but power. "Has anyone ever told you that you should model?" the woman asked. Izabel's mother was skeptical. Modeling seemed like a fantasy, an industry for wealthy girls with connections, not for working-class kids from São Carlos. But the scout was insistent, and eventually, Izabel's parents agreed to let her try. Within weeks, Izabel was signed to her first agency. Within months, she was booking local campaigns. And within 2 years, at just 16, she appeared in Vogue Paris, a feat that typically took models a decade to achieve. The industry that had once seemed impossibly distant was now opening its doors, not because she had changed, but because she had finally found a context where being different was an advantage. But success came with a price that no one had warned her about. The same body that was now celebrated on runways had to be maintained, sculpted, perfected with a precision that bordered on the medical. Izabel quickly learned that beauty at the professional level wasn't about luck or genetics. It was about control. Total, unrelenting, exhausting control. She began working out religiously, not for vanity, but for survival. In an industry where your body was your resume, discipline wasn't optional. It was oxygen. The early years were brutal in ways that glamorous magazine spreads would never reveal. Izabel was living in São Paulo, away from her family for the first time, sharing a cramped apartment with 3 other models who were equally desperate to make it. The competition was vicious. Castings were cattle calls where hundreds of girls who looked almost identical stood in line for hours, only to be dismissed with a glance. Next, next, next. The word became a metronome of rejection. Izabel learned to eat her emotions, then learned to stop eating at all. She learned which photographers were safe and which required a chaperone. She learned that a smile could be a weapon or a shield, depending on who was looking. She learned that the fashion industry loved to discover you, but loved even more to remind you that you were replaceable. For every girl who succeeded, there were thousands who returned home with nothing but debt and diminished self-worth. Could the cruelty she endured as a child have created the almost inhuman work ethic that would later define her career? The world mocked her proportions. She turned them into geometry. Was her relentless pursuit of physical perfection a form of revenge against those who once mocked her body? Or was it something deeper, a need to prove to herself that she was more than what others said she was? By 2005, Izabel Goulart was no longer just another model. She was ascending toward the stratosphere reserved for fashion's true elite. At 20 years old, she received the call that would change her life. Victoria's Secret wanted her to join their angels, the most exclusive and visible modeling collective in the world. It was the equivalent of being drafted into the major leagues, except the uniform was lingerie and the playing field was broadcast to millions of viewers globally. She didn't walk into the spotlight. She marched like a soldier returning to a war only she understood. The Victoria's Secret fashion show wasn't just a fashion event. It was a cultural phenomenon. a theatrical spectacle where models became superheroes, their wings literal and metaphorical. To be an angel meant embodying a very specific ideal: confidence, sensuality, approachability, perfection. It meant maintaining a body that could withstand the scrutiny of high-definition cameras and the judgment of an audience that worshipped beauty but also resented it. Her wings weren't sewn by stylists, they were built by repetition. Izabel approached the opportunity the way she approached everything, with ferocious preparation. While other models relied on natural metabolism or last-minute diets, Izabel built a training regimen that would make professional athletes wince. 2 hours a day, 6 days a week. Pilates for flexibility, kickboxing for power, running for endurance, and a brutal 5-minute plank hold every morning before breakfast. "I treat my body as my career, and my temple," she would later explain, but the discipline went beyond physical training. Izabel studied the great angels who came before her: Gisele Bündchen, Adriana Lima, Alessandra Ambrosio, women who had turned modeling into an art form. She analyzed their walks frame by frame, studied how they held their shoulders, how they made eye contact with cameras, how they transformed from human to icon in the space between backstage and runway. She learned that being an angel wasn't just about looking perfect. It was about making perfection look effortless, about performing invincibility so convincingly that even you started to believe it. What she didn't study, what no one could teach her, was the psychological toll, the constant measurement, the weekly weigh-ins that determine not just your bookings but your value as a human being. The way casting directors would circle parts of your body in red marker, pointing out problem areas that needed to be eliminated. The casual cruelty disguised as professional feedback. "You'd be perfect if you just lost 5 pounds. Your face is beautiful, but your thighs are too muscular. Can you make your breasts look bigger but your waist look smaller?" Izabel absorbed it all. She didn't complain, didn't push back, didn't allow herself the luxury of sensitivity. She simply worked harder. If they wanted her thinner, she would be thinner. If they wanted her stronger, she would be stronger. She became a shapeshifter, molding herself to whatever the industry demanded, believing, or perhaps just hoping, that if she could just be perfect enough, the criticism would stop. Her first Victoria's Secret show in 2005 was a revelation. Izabel walked with a fire that couldn't be taught, a combination of Brazilian warmth and athletic power that set her apart from the more delicate, ethereal angels. The cameras loved her. So did the audience. Within one show, she went from promising newcomer to undeniable star. The years that followed were a blur of flashing lights, screaming crowds, and wings made of crystals and feathers that weighed as much as small children. Izabel became known for her work ethic, always the first to arrive at fittings, the last to leave rehearsals, the one who never complained about uncomfortable shoes or heavy wings or the pressure to maintain an impossible standard of beauty. Backstage, while other models gossiped or checked their phones, Izabel was stretching, hydrating, visualizing her walk. She treated every show like an Olympic event, and her preparation showed. Year after year, she was one of the most reliable, most professional, most consistent angels. Never late, never difficult, never less than extraordinary. The 2008 Victoria's Secret fashion show became the defining moment of her career. Izabel emerged wearing wings encrusted with Swarovski crystals that caught the light like 1,000 tiny suns. Her walk was powerful, purposeful, each step a declaration. And when she reached the end of the runway, she did something that would become iconic. She bowed, a small gesture of gratitude that felt both humble and triumphant. But what the audience didn't see was what happened before that walk. Backstage, 30 minutes before showtime, Izabel was in the bathroom, bent over a sink, fighting back tears. The wings weighed 25 pounds. Her feet were already bleeding from the heels she'd been walking in during rehearsal. She had eaten nothing but vegetables and protein for 6 weeks to achieve the precise level of definition the show required. She was exhausted, depleted, running on adrenaline and the kind of discipline that borders on self-destruction. A makeup artist found her there, asked if she was okay. Izabel straightened, wiped her eyes, reapplied her lipstick, and said with a smile that looked absolutely real, "I'm perfect." And she was. That's what years of training had taught her, not just how to control her body, but how to control the narrative around her body, how to perform invincibility even when she felt most vulnerable. The walk itself lasted less than 2 minutes. 2 minutes of cameras, crowds, music pulsing through speakers loud enough to feel in your chest. 2 minutes of being watched by millions of people who saw perfection and never questioned what it cost to maintain. 2 minutes that would define her career and justify years of sacrifice. Backstage, when reporters asked about her emotions, she said simply, "Every step I took was for the girl who was once afraid to stand tall." It was the perfect soundbite, the kind of quote that gets printed in magazines and shared on social media. But it was also true in the complicated way that public statements can be both performance and confession simultaneously. She had walked for that bullied girl, yes. But she had also walked for the woman who had learned that visibility was both power and prison. That being seen could validate you or consume you, depending on how tightly you held on to yourself in the process. But was this empowerment, or was it something more complicated? Was Izabel walking for herself, or was she walking to prove something to people who no longer mattered? And at what point does proving yourself become a prison of its own making? At what point does the discipline that saves you become the thing that traps you? From 2005 to 2016, Izabel Goulart was Victoria's Secret royalty. She walked in 11 consecutive shows, becoming one of the longest-tenured angels in the brand's history. She appeared on magazine covers, fronted campaigns for Armani, H&M, and Samsung, and became a fixture at Fashion Week in New York, Paris, Milan, and Sao Paulo. Her Instagram following grew into the millions. Her face became synonymous with a very specific brand of aspirational beauty. Athletic, confident, sun-kissed, seemingly impervious to age or gravity. But the reality behind the glamour was far more complex. Maintaining the Victoria's Secret angel body wasn't just difficult, it was all-consuming. Every meal was calculated down to the macronutrient, every workout logged and analyzed, every fluctuation in weight monitored like a stock portfolio. The pressure was immense, not just from the brand, but from the culture at large, which simultaneously worshipped and scrutinized the angels with equal intensity. There were rumors, whispers that occasionally made it into tabloids, but were quickly buried by publicists. Models fainting backstage from dehydration after days of liquid-only diets. Emergency room visits for exhaustion labeled as flu. The quiet competitions between angels about who could survive on the least amount of food, who could train the longest, who could push their body closest to its breaking point without actually breaking. Izabel's response to this pressure was to double down on discipline. If the standard was perfection, she would be more perfect. If the requirement was dedication, she would be more dedicated. She woke at 5:30 a.m. for yoga, hit the gym for 2 hours, ate clean, avoided alcohol, and went to bed early. She turned her life into a regimen, and the regimen became her identity. But was she disciplining her body or punishing it for the crime of never being quite enough? Her fellow angels noticed. Alessandra Ambrosio, who became one of her closest friends, once said, "Izabel doesn't train for the show, she trains for life. It's who she is." It was meant as a compliment, but it also revealed something troubling. When discipline becomes identity, when your training regimen becomes indistinguishable from your personality, have you achieved mastery or lost yourself? Gisele Bündchen, the godmother of Brazilian supermodels, offered a more philosophical take. Izabel has what money can't buy: kindness. It was a curious observation, suggesting that beneath the muscles and discipline was something softer, something human. But it also raised questions. If kindness was her most notable quality, what did that say about an industry where basic human decency was remarkable rather than expected? The reality was that Izabel existed in a constant state of negotiation between two versions of herself: the disciplined professional who never missed a workout, never ate off plan, never showed weakness, and the woman who sometimes just wanted to sleep in, eat pizza, take a day off without guilt. But the first version had become so dominant, so ingrained that the second barely had room to breathe. There were warning signs, moments when the facade cracked just enough to reveal the strain beneath. A backstage photo from 2013 showed Izabel sitting alone after a show, still in her wings, head in her hands, the exhaustion visible despite her perfect makeup. A candid shot from 2015 caught her staring at a plate of food at a Victoria's Secret after-party, her expression unreadable but unsettling. Was it longing? Fear? Disgust? The photograph went viral briefly, with commenters debating what it meant, but Izabel never addressed it. Friends who knew her well spoke carefully about her relationship with food and exercise, tiptoeing around words like obsessive or disordered because those terms seemed both accurate and insufficient. Yes, Izabel was obsessive about her training. But she was also a professional athlete in everything but name, someone whose livelihood depended on maintaining a specific physical standard. Where was the line between professional dedication and personal pathology? And who gets to draw that line? The person living the life or the observers judging from the outside? But kindness doesn't pay the bills in fashion, and it doesn't keep you relevant when younger models are constantly nipping at your heels. By the mid-2010s, the modeling industry was changing. Social media was creating new kinds of stars, influencers who built followings without ever walking a runway. The body standard was shifting, with more emphasis on wellness and body positivity than on the ultra-lean physiques that had defined the Victoria's Secret era. In 2016, Izabel walked her final Victoria's Secret fashion show in Paris. She didn't know it would be her last. None of them did. The feathers were heavier than they looked, but backstage after the show, a photographer captured a moment that would later become iconic. Izabel looking up at the stage lights, sweat glistening on her skin, tears in her eyes, smiling. It was a portrait of exhaustion, triumph, and something that looked like relief. Someone asked her what she was feeling. Her answer was cryptic. Obrigada, for everything I survived. What did she survive? The physical demands, the psychological pressure, the constant judgment? Or was it something deeper? The survival of self in an industry designed to erase individuality in favor of an ideal. When Victoria's Secret announced in 2018 that they would no longer hold their annual fashion show, it felt like the end of an era. The angels, those impossibly perfect women who had dominated fashion for 2 decades, were suddenly relics of a bygone age. Some critics celebrated the show's demise as progress, arguing that it had perpetuated unhealthy body standards. Others mourned it as the loss of a cultural touchstone, a piece of glamorous escapism in an increasingly cynical world. For Izabel, the end of Victoria's Secret wasn't a crisis. It was liberation. While some former angels struggled to find relevance in the post-VS landscape, Izabel pivoted with the same discipline she had applied to her training. She rebranded herself as a wellness advocate, sharing her workout routines on social media, partnering with fitness brands, and speaking openly about the importance of mental health alongside physical health. Discipline had made her immortal. Now the world wanted to diagnose her, but the pivot wasn't without controversy. In 2023, a wellness blogger posted a critique of Izabel's routine, calling it unsustainable and promoting disordered eating and exercise habits. The post went viral, sparking a heated debate about the line between discipline and obsession, between self-care and self-harm. The blogger, a former model herself, wrote with the authority of experience, "I know what it's like to be trapped in the cycle Izabel is promoting. It starts with discipline. It becomes control. Eventually, it owns you. You can't have a spontaneous meal because you haven't tracked the macros. You can't skip a workout because your entire sense of self-worth is tied to that number on the scale, that circumference of your thigh, that definition in your abs. This isn't wellness. It's a prison with a prettier name." The post struck a nerve. Within hours, it had been shared tens of thousands of times. Fitness influencers weighed in. Eating disorder specialists offered their professional opinions. Former models came forward with their own stories of the industry's toxic relationship with food and exercise. The consensus seemed to be forming. Izabel Goulart's routine wasn't aspirational, it was dangerous. Izabel's critics argued that her regimen, 2 hours of daily exercise, strict dietary control, and almost monastic dedication to routine, was a symptom of an industry that had warped her sense of normal. They pointed to studies about athlete overtraining, about the psychological toll of constant body monitoring, about the ways that external pressures can become internalized until you can't tell the difference between what you want and what you've been conditioned to want. They wanted vulnerability. She offered precision. Izabel's defenders fired back, arguing that criticizing a woman for being disciplined was just another form of policing women's bodies, that there was a double standard at play. Male athletes were praised for similar dedication, while female models were pathologized. They argued that Izabel's routine was her choice, her autonomy, her right. And Izabel herself? She remained characteristically unfazed. In a carefully worded Instagram post, she wrote, "Self-discipline isn't obsession, it's self-respect. I'm not chasing youth, I'm chasing endurance." The post received millions of likes and reignited the debate with even more intensity. Was she right? Can discipline exist without crossing into obsession? At what point does self-respect become self-punishment? And who gets to decide where that line is? The person living the life or the observers judging from the outside? The controversy revealed something uncomfortable about modern culture's relationship with female bodies. We want women to be fit but not too fit, disciplined but not too disciplined, ambitious but not too ambitious. We celebrate their success and then scrutinize the methods that achieved it. We demand that women be extraordinary and then criticize them for the sacrifices required to be extraordinary. Izabel, for her part, refused to engage further with the debate. She continued posting her workouts, her meals, her life, not as a defense, but as a statement. This is who I am. This is what I do. You don't have to understand it, but you will respect it. Can anyone ever truly escape the shadow of their past success? Or does the peak of your career become a burden you carry forever? A standard against which everything else is measured and found wanting. At 39, Izabel Goulart is living a life that would be unrecognizable to the 14-year-old girl discovered in a São Paulo supermarket. She splits her time between Paris, Frankfurt, and São Paulo, depending on where her work and her fiancé, German goalkeeper Kevin Trapp, are located. The relationship itself is a testament to her evolution. Two elite athletes who understand the dedication required to perform at the highest level, who can support each other's ambitions without resentment or competition. Their love story is the kind that fashion magazines adore. Beautiful people in beautiful places, living beautiful lives. They met at a celebrity event in 2015, were introduced by mutual friends, and felt an immediate connection. Kevin understood what it meant to have your body be your profession, to be judged not just on your talent but on your physical condition, to know that one injury or one off-season could end everything you'd worked for. He didn't see Izabel's training as obsessive. He saw it as professional. "We push each other," Izabel has said in interviews. "When I don't want to train, he reminds me why I started. When he's recovering from an injury, I remind him that the body heals, but the mind has to stay strong. It sounds like a partnership built on mutual respect and understanding. But it also sounds like two people who have made performance the center of their relationship, who connect through shared discipline rather than shared vulnerability. Kevin and Izabel's relationship is often described as a fairy tale, and in many ways, it is. They met at a time when both were at the peak of their respective careers, both traveling constantly, both living lives that left little room for normalcy. But they made it work through the same principle that governed Izabel's career: discipline. They scheduled calls, prioritized time together, and refused to let distance become an excuse for disconnection. A distance doesn't matter when the connection is real, Izabel has said. It's the kind of statement that sounds like a greeting card but carries weight when you understand the logistics. Paris to Frankfurt, Frankfurt to Sao Paulo to wherever the next job takes her. They make it work because they've both mastered the art of commitment, of showing up even when it's inconvenient, of treating relationships with the same seriousness they treat their professions. But the question lingers: can someone who has spent their entire adult life performing ever fully relax? Can the discipline that built a career ever be turned off? Or does it become so ingrained that it's indistinguishable from personality? Izabel's daily routine suggests the latter. She still wakes before dawn for yoga. She still trains for 2 hours. She still monitors her diet with precision. But she's added new elements: meditation, phone-free time, cooking for pleasure rather than just nutrition. She speaks 4 languages fluently: Portuguese, English, French, and Spanish, and uses them to engage with fans and brands across continents. She's become a global citizen in the truest sense, comfortable in boardrooms and beaches, photo shoots and gyms. Yet there's a rigidity to her life that's impossible to ignore. Every day is structured, every activity scheduled, every deviation from routine carefully considered. Her social media posts appear at optimal times, her workout videos are professionally lit, her captions are motivational without being vulnerable. Everything is curated, controlled, perfected. Critics might call it compulsive. Izabel calls it freedom. "Discipline is my freedom," she said, explaining that structure allows her to operate at her best, that routine is liberating rather than limiting. But is it? Or is it possible that the girl who was bullied for being different learned to control her difference so thoroughly that she lost the ability to be spontaneous, to be messy, to be anything other than perfect? Has discipline become her way of ensuring she never gives anyone ammunition to hurt her again? And if so, is that strength or is that a wound that never healed? Her relationship with Kevin Trapp offers some insight into these questions, though the answers are complicated. Their engagement in 2018 was celebrated as a fairy tale: 2 elite athletes who understood each other's dedication, who could support without competing, who spoke the language of discipline fluently. Kevin, as a professional goalkeeper, lived a life structured around training, diet, performance, a life that mirrored Izabel's in almost every way. In interviews, they speak about pushing each other, about shared workout sessions, about the mutual respect that comes from understanding what it takes to maintain peak physical condition. "We're both disciplined people," Izabel has said. "We understand that excellence isn't an accident, it's a daily choice." It sounds healthy, supportive, aspirational, but there's also something revealing in what they don't talk about: the moments of weakness, the days when discipline feels like burden rather than blessing, the times when they might want to just be rather than constantly become. Their relationship, at least as presented publicly, seems built on shared commitment to optimization, to improvement, to never settling. And while that can be incredibly motivating, it also raises the question: is there room in that dynamic for vulnerability, for failure, for the kind of raw, unproductive emotions that don't fit into a training schedule? But is it? Or is it possible that the girl who was bullied for being different learned to control her difference so thoroughly that she lost the ability to be spontaneous, to be messy, to be anything other than perfect? Her social media presence offers clues but few answers. Izabel's Instagram is a carefully curated mix of workout videos, fashion shoots, travel photography, and motivational quotes. It's aspirational and inspirational in equal measure, showing a life of discipline, beauty, and success. But it's also notably lacking in vulnerability, in the kind of authentic messiness that has become currency for younger influencers. There are no photos of bad days, no confessions about struggles, no admission that maintaining this level of perfection might sometimes feel like a burden rather than a choice. Everything is filtered through the lens of empowerment and positivity, as if acknowledging difficulty would somehow invalidate the entire project of her life. When asked about this in a 2022 interview with Porter magazine, Izabel was characteristically direct. "People want to see the real me, but this is real. The training, the discipline, the gratitude. This is who I am. I'm not hiding anything. I'm just not performing struggle for an audience." It was a pointed comment, a pushback against the demand that women, particularly women in the public eye, perform vulnerability as proof of authenticity. But it also left questions unanswered. Does Izabel struggle? Does she have moments of doubt, of weakness, of wanting to quit? And if she does, what does she do with those feelings? Does she process them privately, or does she simply push through them with the same discipline she applies to everything else? And if it's the latter, what happens to all those unacknowledged emotions? Do they disappear? Or do they accumulate somewhere, waiting for a moment when the discipline finally fails? The closest we get to an answer comes from a rare, unguarded moment in a 2020 Women's Health interview. When asked about her motivation, Izabel paused for a long time before answering. "Every morning when I hold that plank, there's a moment, maybe 30 seconds in, when everything hurts and I want to stop. And every morning I tell myself, this is where it counts. Not when it's easy, but when it's hard. That's where you find out who you are." The hardest muscle she ever trained was the one that refused to quit. It's a revealing statement, suggesting that beneath the discipline is not effortless perfection, but daily struggle, a constant battle between what's comfortable and what's necessary. Izabel's strength isn't that she doesn't feel pain or doubt. It's that she's learned to use those feelings as fuel rather than excuses. But at what cost? Friends say she's warm and generous, that behind the cameras she's funny and down to earth. Family members describe her as devoted, someone who never forgot where she came from. Yet there's also a sense that Izabel exists at a remove, that she's friendly but not necessarily close, warm but not necessarily intimate. It's as if the discipline that serves her professionally creates a moat around her emotionally. Were these final decisions? To continue training with the same intensity? To maintain the same standards? To never fully let down her guard? Acts of strength or acts of self-protection? Is Izabel still running from the schoolyard where children called her a giraffe? Or is she running towards something we can't see? In 2024, at 39 years old, Izabel Goulart did something that shocked the industry. She walked in a major Paris Fashion Week show, not as a nostalgia act or a special guest, but as a working model booked on her own merit. It was a statement, a middle finger to anyone who thought her career had an expiration date. The fashion press went wild. Here was a woman who should have aged out of the industry years ago, who should have gracefully retired into influencing or entrepreneurship, walking alongside models half her age and holding her own. The photographs from that day are striking. Izabel on the runway, her body as sculpted as ever, her walk as powerful as it was in 2008, her face showing lines and character that somehow made her more compelling rather than less. When asked about it afterward, Izabel gave an answer that was both defiant and vulnerable. "When I stop shining from the inside, I'll stop. But that light hasn't dimmed. If anything, it's brighter now because I finally understand where it comes from. Where does it come from? The question hangs in the air like the last note of a song. Is it from the little girl who learned to stand tall despite mockery? From the teenager discovered in a supermarket who saw a path out of poverty? From the angel who walked 1,000 runways and never stumbled? Or is it from something simpler? From the daily choice to show up, to do the work, to treat your body and your life with respect even when no one is watching? Izabel's legacy is still being written, but already it's clear she represents something important in the evolution of beauty and modeling. She came of age in an era that demanded impossible perfection but is aging into an era that values authenticity. She built her career on discipline in an industry increasingly skeptical of discipline. She represents both the best and the most troubling aspects of aspirational beauty, inspiring on one hand, potentially damaging on the other. But perhaps the most interesting thing about Izabel Goulart is what she refuses to be. A victim, a cautionary tale, a woman who peaked at 25 and has spent the rest of her life mourning what was. She's rewritten the script, extended the timeline, and in doing so created space for other women to do the same. She's also forced an uncomfortable question into the cultural conversation. Why do we celebrate discipline in men but pathologize it in women? Why is a male athlete's training regimen called dedication while a female model's is called obsession? Why do we demand that women be extraordinary and then judge them for the work required to be extraordinary? Izabel doesn't have all the answers, but she's living the questions, and in doing so, she's showing that there are multiple ways to be a woman, multiple ways to age, multiple ways to define success. You can be both strong and feminine, disciplined and joyful, public and private. You don't have to choose between being admired and being real. You can be both or neither or something else entirely. The photograph on her wall, the 14-year-old girl standing alone in the schoolyard, remains. Izabel has moved dozens of times over the past 2 decades to different cities, different countries, different lives. But that photograph comes with her every time, carefully packed and prominently displayed. It's not a shrine to suffering or a monument to overcoming. It's simpler than that. It's a reminder. The girl in the photo never left. She just learned to lift the weight of her own legend, a reminder that the girl they laughed at became the woman they photograph. That standing tall was always the point, even when, especially when, it made her different. That discipline isn't about punishment, it's about respect. That you can't glow if you don't sweat. That beauty is energy, and energy is choice, and choice is freedom. Izabel Goulart is still walking, still training, still standing tall. And the light that catches her at 5:47 a.m. every morning hasn't dimmed. If anything, it's stronger now because it's no longer borrowed from cameras or crowds or runways. It's hers. It always was. At 5:47 a.m., the light still finds her, but it no longer defines her. If endurance becomes identity, can you ever stop without disappearing? And when a woman turns discipline into art, is she liberated or just performing control beautifully enough to be forgiven for it?